are doing well today. Welcome to episode 23 of Conversations with I Follow the Leader. How can grace improve your culture? How can grace improve your culture? Today, we have a very special guest that we'll be bringing on soon, Dr. LaQuoia Johnson. You will learn about some of the difficulties she faced in the healthcare field and how that motivated her to help others cultivate safe spaces where diversity, equity, and inclusion are prioritized. We'll also discuss her Grace Culture framework, which includes a growth mindset, respect, accountability, courageous conversations, and equity. Dr. Johnson is the founder of Growing Through It LLC and the author of How Racism Manifests, but it's actually RXA. Obviously, she is in pharmacy. Love that. How Racism Manifests Inside the Small World of Pharmacy. So she is a residency trained and board certified pharmacist with 20 years of pharmacy practice experience. I am so excited. Welcome, welcome. How are you?
I am so good, Antoinette, and so happy and honored to be here with you today.
Thank you. And we've been able to have a couple of conversations over the past few months, and so I'm so excited for our audience to learn more about you, your connection to DEI, and of course how grace can improve culture. Is there anything more you want to tell about yourself that maybe we didn't mention in your bio?
Oh wow, that's great. Well, I will say I like to call myself bold, brilliant, and tenacious because I think it's important for us to label ourselves, and more importantly, let God tell us who we are as far as who I want to be and who I'm becoming, as opposed to letting the world label us. So I am a bold, brilliant, and tenacious woman of God, and I'm also a single mom, a loving sister, and I just love my parents who I support as well. So that's a little bit about, the totality of who I am.
That's great. And I think so important, right? Who are we allowing to label us? And definitely those who are faith-filled out there, right? That should be God and not others and what words people have said to you. So thank you
Right.
for sharing that. And for those who may not have decided by now, yes, the grace, right, is also connected to Dr. LaQuoia's faith as well. And so I
Mhm.
want to get started, learn a little more about you. So, starting from that rich history in pharmacy, what was your experience like?
Wow. So I would say, starting out, I didn't even want to be a pharmacist. I grew up wanting to be a pediatrician from about the age of about 8 years old. I remember nursing was kind of where I was going, and my dad said something to me that was very pivotal at 8 years old. And this is not, I just want to go ahead and preface it. This is no shame at all on nursing, because my gosh, our nursing team has done a phenomenal job over the last 2 years. All medical providers have done a phenomenal job, but I remember there was a particular area of nursing or kind of nurse that I wanted to be. And my dad said, well, do you want to be the one taking the orders or giving the orders? And that kind of expanded my mind around, well, what is it that I really want to do? And I knew I loved babies, so I wanted to be a pediatrician. But my sophomore year of college, I realized I didn't really like children as much as I thought I did. And so I went and traveled, studied abroad in South Africa. And that's where I
Wow.
really got that first inspiration to go to pharmacy school. Had the opportunity to work with some women who were HIV positive. They were making memory boxes for their children because their only access to medications were through drug studies. And during that time that I went, it was the HIV AIDS pandemic. It was the height of the pandemic back in 2000. I think it was 2002. I was there. And that's really what sparked my interest in pharmacy. So once I came back to school, having been abroad for the first semester of my senior year, I finished out that year and obtained my certification as a pharmacy technician and started out in Walgreens. So I worked my way up pharmacy basically. I worked as
Yeah.
a pharmacy technician. I worked, obviously, I did pharmacy school, graduated from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the #1 pharmacy school in America still,
I love it.
and did residencies in California. And so I've actually had the experience of working in long-term care, retail, acute care, both staff pharmacists by day, clinical pharmacist by night as night shift pharmacist, and I've done a PGY1 and a PGY2 in health system administration. After working in California for about 5.5 years, I came back here to North Carolina in 2016. And that's really where the inspiration around a grace culture really started, is after the experiences that I had moving back home to North Carolina, practicing while Black as a pharmacist in North Carolina was definitely a culture shock for me. When I compare it to the experience that I had in California.
Yeah, and some people who are listening or watching may not know what that means, right? Practicing while Black. And so, can you
Mhm.
tell us a little more? What are some of the common microaggressions and unfortunately prejudices, etc., that people in the pharmacy, in the medical field, right, in other fields often experience?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I want to say it really relates back to that role incongruency, right? And so in a lot of medical professions, there just aren't a lot of people that look like me or you, Antoinetta. You
Yeah.
know, it's a very small subset of the population that look like me and you. And so walking into that type of environment, I believe it really was role incongruency in this, in the respect that people did not see me as and value me in the role that I was in and the authority that I had. And so that was one of the issues that I encountered. So there was a lot of resistance from my team members. And then I was also in middle management. And middle management, I like to call it the middle hell, is really hard because you have pressures from the top and the bottom. And from the top, I experienced a lot of microaggressive language and behaviors. It could be, a lot of times we're walking into a meeting and we're one of the only Black women in that environment. And so there were lots of microaggressions that I experienced there, lots of microaggressions that I experienced at the hand of my direct leader. So I will say the most egregious one that I would say I experienced was 10 months into my role. So remembering I had just moved from California to North Carolina, and I accepted my role in November of 2016. In October of 2017, I'm sitting in front of my leader, and she says to me, LaQuoia, until we went to Chicago, I didn't even know you are a human. I would say
Wow.
at that point, my soul stood up. I didn't even know what to say to that because no one has ever
Mm,
questioned my humanity, right? And so that was really hard for me. It was a hard experience for me because here I am sitting in an office setting, one on one with someone who I report to, and it's my word against yours. I don't even really know what I'm feeling at this moment. And I would say there were multiple instances of those things that continued to happen for me throughout that entire experience. But I would say that was probably the most egregious one for me because, I've been called a lot of things. Most of us have been called a lot of names, both in
yeah.
our face and behind our backs, but no one has ever questioned my humanity. And that didn't really come up for me until 2020. So that happened, and I like to say there are two bookends of my experience. That was like the first real one that I can really think back to, but the other bookend where I really said, okay, I have some decisions to make, There was a lot of things that happened in between this, but in 2020, when my leader used the N word for the third time, and I asked for support and I reported these things and ended up having a conversation with her as well about it, I realized there was not going to be any accountability. At that point, I had talked to HR, I had talked to my one up leader, I had talked to several people within the organization, and I just realized there really wasn't going to be any support. So I had to make a decision, and that decision was to choose my own peace, my own joy, and recognize that I was no longer in an environment in which I could grow and thrive. And so I would say that that's not the case for every pharmacy department, and that is just my story. But I will tell you that I've talked to a plethora of pharmacists all across the nation, and a lot of us are working in very toxic environments due to just the nature of the culture of pharmacy itself.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's so important because people who maybe aren't in an underrepresented group or maybe are only in one underrepresented group, these may not be things that happen to you in the workplace. But I think the more underrepresented categories that you have, these things are happening. And like you said, right? Out in the open, but also one to one, so that it would become who he said, she said. And I think it's so important to have these conversations, right? We put courageous in quotes because
Yeah.
our hope is that these conversations will not be courageous in 5 years. But what you're telling us, what your book is about, often some people never know this is going on in the places they are working, in the places they are volunteering, in their community. Right. And so it's so important to have these conversations. What you dealt with is harmful. And I think there's a lot more research now on the harm that many underrepresented groups are experiencing. And what does that, right? You said your soul stood up. So, what does that do to your soul, to who you are over time? Even as you stated in the beginning, you know who you are. But when you're in these toxic environments that are
Mm-hmm.
constantly trying to challenge that, I know from experience that is a day to day struggle and fight of how long can I stay?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Yes.
really, just proud of you, not only for leaving, but for being willing to share your story so others can hopefully gain that strength, right? Talk to mentors, talk to people like you. How can I get to the other side? And so, would love to know. I've been able to read some of your book and would love to know how did you get the courage to write about your experience, and if you can just tell us a little more
Yeah.
about the book so others can go purchase it as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I would say the book for me wasn't really about courage. The courage really came with like actually publishing and promoting the book. Writing the book was really cathartic for me. When I left out of the pharmacy department in September 11th of 2020, I was very happy. It was the most empowered feeling I had ever felt in my life because I was choosing me, right? But at the same time, I needed to do something with this pent up energy and aggression and resentment that I had. Over the last year and a half, it's been a real healing journey for me. So I talk a little bit in the introduction of the book how this was my healing process. This is my healing journey. And really, the book has been written for, I would say, three individuals. It's been written, one, for individuals who look like me, to really affirm that this really is the experience that you're having. Because for so long, I wasn't quite sure what was this experience that I was having. Some of that imposter syndrome started to seep in, and I'm like, well, is it really me? And what do I need to change? So I went through that process of trying to mold myself and twist myself into a pretzel to like fit this version of maybe this is what they want, and maybe I'll get further ahead if I kind of transform myself. But It doesn't work that way. All right. I'm not being true to myself. So that's the first person that this is written for those people who are in the environment right now and they are experiencing it, and really be able to call out, this really is what you're experiencing. The second category is for my managers, because that's really where the bottleneck is. The managerial level is the bottleneck. It doesn't matter that the CEO is on board. It doesn't matter that the senior leadership is on board with diversity, equity, and inclusion. They see it as performance, and they also see it as money, right? But it doesn't matter what initiative you have. If the managers don't have the support that they need, then they really can't do anything about the initiative. There will not be any forward movement. And so it's for the managers, particularly in pharmacy, to understand, what are the experiences that people are having that they're not talking about, or what are the experiences that people are talking about that you're gaslighting. So I want you to know, I want you to have explicit examples of what people are experiencing and the normative behaviors in the pharmacy culture that we have allowed, that we have all participated in. And so you really know what needs to be changed. And then thirdly, and most importantly, I would say, Antoinette, is for pharmacy students, pharmacy residents, and pharmacy technicians. And then really any healthcare person who is, or someone who's thinking about going into healthcare, or they're in a program right now, they also need to know what cultures and environments they are walking into. And because I don't want to turn anyone away from pharmacy or healthcare at all, because we need you. But you also need to be armed and prepared with an awareness so that you can already go into it with a strategy around, how am I going to respond when I encounter these situations? Because it's not an if, it's a when you encounter these situations. So I want you to be armed with all the knowledge that you need to have so that you can go ahead and start preparing yourself for what that looks like. Because it's not what we go through, is what we grow through and how we respond to it.
Thank you. That's so important and goes really into your framework. You talked a lot about culture and the current culture, and the current culture in pharmacy is similar to the current culture in tax, in corporations and nonprofits, unfortunately, because of the systems in place, especially in the United States. And so, would love for you now, can you talk to us a little more about your framework,
Yeah.
and how can grace help these cultures who are currently struggling with, how do I do DEI? How do I do it better? How do we have a culture of belonging over toxicity?
Yes, yes, so much. So there's so much in that. I would say, first and foremost, grace culture was inspired out of really the pain that I went through. Because even when I was in that environment, I understood that there was a purpose and that God had placed me there for a reason, regardless of the pressure, regardless of the stress, regardless of all the storms that were put in front of me, that I was really there for a purpose. And I discovered that purpose was to understand what grace looks like and how to apply it both to myself and extend it to others. When we talk about grace, a lot of people have used it as though it's a pass for bad behavior. I've been hearing so much, we just need to give each other grace and we just need to extend grace to others. But I don't think people really understand what that means. And so grace culture really is, it really comes from a biblical background, in that God has given us all grace for our past transgressions. But that grace that is extended is not such that, well, now you're aware of a problem, you get to continue on in the same cycle or behavior. That's not what grace is about. Grace is about, once you become aware, now you change your behavior. And so that's really where grace comes from. That, and I thought about grace as a culture, because we really need a culture shift. And in healthcare, when I started, we had this framework called just culture. And that was where we looked at medication errors, not looking at the person and blaming the person, but really looking at the system and how the system is designed. And so grace culture really looks at that kind of framework. We have to realize that we were were all born into a system that was already pre-designed before we ever got here. It's not our fault that the system is what it was, right? It's not our fault. But now that we are aware, and you can't say that you're not aware. At this point, it's willful ignorance for you not to be aware of what's going on and what and how you contribute to it, right? And so that's where grace really came from. And when I look at the acronym of grace, really the Holy Spirit gave this to me in that the G stands with a growth mindset. Growth mindset meaning I can change and other people can change with knowledge and effort. We actually can change. And you know, science has actually shown that our brain can morph, and we build new connections every day. And so even though there's some belief systems that are operating behind the background of your mind that you don't know, you're not aware of, once you become aware of it, you can actually change those belief systems, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is respect. That's what the R is for. We are all entitled to respect. Just by being a mere human being, you have respect. And so respect does not have to be earned. I don't have to have a certain title to have respect. If I walk in on two legs, I should have respect. And in turn, I should give other people respect as well. The A is for accountability. We all have to take accountability for the part that we have played. I too have played a part in the system. I've allowed people to say things and behave in ways that were not congruent with the way that they should, based upon the mission, vision, and values of the organization. I admit that I have been complicit in it as well. So all of us have to be aware of our language and our behaviors and the impact that we have on other people. And then the C is for courageous conversations, just like we're having right here, Antoinette. We have to move past the hurt and the pain and be able to have conversations about it. So that's my job and my role now. My purpose is to have these conversations, use my voice to bring awareness. But now let's talk about what's going on so that we can move forward. We can't have the courageous conversations until people do their own self work and understand how they have played a role in the system. And then last but not least, the most important part is equity. I like to say we're on a journey to equity. And if you look at my logo, that logo for Grace Culture, that's why the E is so big, because we're on this journey to equity. And what's happening right now is a lot of organizations are trying to put a new roof on an old house that does not have a solid foundation. You cannot continue to recruit and hire people of color into a toxic work environment, because that's what happened to me. You cannot retain people in a toxic work environment until we deal with the environment that already exists. When you start holding people accountable for the toxic cultures that already exist, then we can get to the equity. But we can't really get there because people refuse to deal with what's really going on in their culture. So that's where I come in and want to help managers create those inclusive environments so people who look like me and people of other dimensions that don't fit into their box will be able to stay.
Thank you. I think that's so important and just want to repeat that back. Growth mindset, respect, accountability, courageous conversations, and like you said, last but not least, equity. I know we are coming up on time, and this has been just amazing. And we are going to put all of your information in the chat and just link to you so that everyone can learn more about you, about grace and how grace can improve their culture. And I love that you talked about a lot of the things that we say are really important. So having that cultural audit, knowing where you are, having
Mhm.
the conversations, teaching, especially that which you talked about, the middle managers, do they have the tools, skills, and strategies to actually live DEI out? And so it's not enough just to talk about it, but do the people in your organization have the strategies and tools to really listen, to have these courageous conversations to move the culture forward? So thank you so much for coming on today. Would love to know, do you have any closing thoughts for those who are watching or listening?
Oh my gosh. Well, I just want to say thank you for having me, Antoinetta. This has been so powerful to be able to speak with you and have this courageous conversation. I do want to say that, my goal and mission is just like you said, to equip managers who don't have the support that they need with the tools to really just do good work. Really, to do good work and be good humans. I will be having a 5-day virtual summit, and Antoinetta will be on one of those days. We're going to have a virtual summit for pharmacy leaders, pharmacy residents, and student leaders to come on and learn more about grace culture, learn more about how it can really improve your leadership and shape it. So that's going to be March 21st through March 25th. Go ahead and mark your calendars. More information will be coming out, but it's going to be phenomenal. It's only going to be 1 hour per day, and I can't wait to hear Antoinetta talk about courageous conversations.
Thank you so much. And let us know, how can people get in touch with you? How can they stay connected with you?
Yes. So the best way to get in touch with me right now is LinkedIn. I have a lot of things in the background where I'm rebuilding my website and things of that nature. So just go ahead and reach out to me on LinkedIn. I am a real human being, love to engage with people. Shoot me a message if we're not connected, connect, and also follow me so you can get the regular updates. You can go ahead and follow the Grace Culture page as well. I haven't put a lot on, but March 1st is when I'll start upping my content around Grace Culture. So go ahead, follow Grace Culture, connect and follow me as well. And just go ahead and DM me. I would love to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for coming on today. Such an important conversation. It's been great to get to know you, and we're really looking forward to continuing to follow your career and all the amazing things that you're doing.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. Thank you, everyone. That was episode 23 of Conversations with I Follow the Leader. How can grace improve your culture? We hope to see you back next week for episode 24. To perform or not to perform, that is the DEI question. We will have a leader from I Follow the Leader, Kevin Lewis, on, and we will be talking about have a lot of holidays become performative. So we've seen a lot this Black History Month. A lot of people are under fire for their Black history content and not even partnering with Black designers. So we're going to get into that, and also just talk about holidays in general. Have they become performative instead of actually celebrating what they're meant to? Thank you all for watching or listening, and we will see you back soon for another episode of Conversations with I Follow the Leader.